My name is Norm Volsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast.
Thanks, Norm. It's an honor to be here, and it's been fun to work with you over the years.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast with your host, Norm Volsky. And today we are joined by Natalie Cummins. Hi, Natalie.
Hello, Norm. How are you today?
I am great. Great. So for all of our listeners and viewers, Natalie is the Chief Business Officer at Talkspace. Natalie has over 30 years in healthcare leadership. She spearheads Talkspace's direct-to-enterprise business. Formerly, Natalie was president of BioReference Laboratories. And in addition, she's worked at Roche Diagnostics, Quest Diagnostics, GeoMind. She's got her master's in public administration with a health policy focus from NYU and a bachelor's from Ithaca College. Natalie blends academic prowess with hands-on leadership and reshaping healthcare paradigms. Earlier in her career, she worked for a Medicaid health plan, and would love to welcome Natalie to the show.
Thank you, Norm. I really appreciate that. It's great to be here.
All right. Well, let's have some fun today and jump in. I ask most people on this podcast, first question, what inspired you to get into healthcare?
Really, my grandparents. So,
Really?
So my dad and my grandparents are Italian immigrants, or were Italian immigrants. And when they came to this country, it was a really hard transition. And so as a teenager, as things kind of happened, specifically with my grandparents, I found myself in a place of responsibility and thought that I would either be a physician that focused on the elderly, or I would be a nursing home administrator. Who knew I would be here on the commercial side of the business right now? But it was certainly my grandparents that inspired me.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So walk me through your early career experiences. You were in the health plan space, specifically focused on Medicaid, I believe. Kind of walk me through kind of how you found your way into that market, and just what were those experiences, and what have you learned that you still apply to your career today from that time?
So I actually, so I'm a New Yorker at heart, grew up in upstate New York, as you said, went to Ithaca College. So proud New Yorker, ended up down here in New York City after graduation, and actually started at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center.
Top 3 facility in the country based on metrics.
That is correct. And they had a great program where they recruited kids out of college to run their outpatient clinics as administrators. So ended up at Sloan Kettering, worked on my master's at NYU, and found myself realizing that type of facility environment wasn't necessarily for me. So you're 100% correct. Ended up at Oxford Health Plans, started my career on the Medicare side of the business as a sales rep, and really worked from being a sales rep to a sales manager to a general manager. And when I was a general manager, that's where I found myself on the Medicaid side of the business.
You worked on both sides of that business.
That's correct. And through Oxford, which was a newly publicly traded company, really found my foundation. So on the finance side, on the IT side, on the general business side, on the sales side, really understanding the political environment of healthcare. It was this beautiful kind of on-the-job education for somebody who was starting out in healthcare. So it was a time and a place where people could really learn on the job, and things were moving fast, but not so fast that you weren't getting your like sea legs grounded.
So with 30 years of experience in healthcare leadership, what are some key principles you believe are crucial, for successful commercialization of products, in this space?
I think that the first thing is really understanding the landscape and the policies that surround the healthcare product or service that you're looking to offer to the market. I would say the next thing is working with agility but patience at the same time. So
Yep.
really being able to react and think about that next play mentality, but have
Hmm.
patience as you're executing. And I also think when you're working in healthcare, you have to remember this is not a widget,
Yep.
right? This is people's lives that we're working with, and thinking about how the products and the services that we're bringing to market impact them is important from a long-term success perspective.
Yep. So, Talkspace, I would, see from your background as like your first like high tech growth stage startup. Maybe, that's a little misinformation on my part because I'm not as
Yeah.
familiar with some of the other companies like GeoMind and
Yeah.
not as knowledgeable about BioReference Laboratories. Kind of walk me through like what led you to Talkspace and like some of these other high level executive roles, like how they prepared you, to work at your current job.
Yeah. So you're 100% right from a digital perspective, but from a startup perspective, there have been multiple companies that I worked with. So
Yeah, because
Ariosa,
Quest and Roche are pretty big.
they're pretty
It
big.
just seemed those are not startups, but
That
the
is
others I
correct.
wasn't so sure.
Ariosa was probably the most notable startup that I worked with.
Hmm.
So started working with Ariosa as a consultant when there weren't even 10 people at the company, and worked with Ariosa, which was a non-invasive prenatal technology company, a
Hmm.
genetic test for women, and worked with them through the sale of Roche. So I actually arrived at Roche via an acquisition of a startup.
That's the
So
best way to enter a big company, and
totally
then get out after.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I had a colleague actually who I had consulted with who knew me well enough to know that after Ariosa was purchased by Roche, that about a year would be my time frame there, and
Yeah.
that's how I ended up at Genimind, which was another startup, and helped to launch a pharmacogenetic test through Genimind. So this is the first time working specifically at a digital company,
Hmm.
but certainly not the first time at working at a fast-paced 10-year startup. We're actually 10 years old
Yeah.
here at Talkspace,
Well,
publicly
thanks
traded.
for educating me. I
Yeah.
am very, very niche within, kind of this
Yeah.
health and benefits and, directly sold to health plan technology market. So
Uh-huh.
we've been lucky enough to work with, great clients like Livongo, Hinge Health, Lyra, Progeny, Verta, and many, many others.
Yes.
So that's the like swim lane I know. Some of the like genetic testing stuff hasn't really, gotten a ton of traction in the like employee benefits market.
Yeah.
So that's, where I'm still educating myself on, what you did before you got here.
It's an interesting space.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. So like what were some of these learnings, that you had in some of these previous things and, how do you apply some of those learnings now?
Yeah. I think that one of the key learnings, and it doesn't matter if it's a genetic company or a digital company, right,
Hmm.
is about communication. So you have to be able to effectively listen, learn, communicate to your team, to your colleagues, to the market, to VC, whomever it is, whether it be genetics or digital. That communication piece remains constant across our healthcare landscape, right? I think
Hmm.
that the other piece within communication, Norm, is listening. Sometimes, as we are starting businesses or even mature businesses, we stop listening to each other and the things that are happening around us. And as soon as we stop listening, in my opinion, we stop being successful because
Hmm.
we don't understand the environment, we don't understand the landscape, we don't understand the people. So, listening and communicating, I would say, are the top two that I would carry through any healthcare company or any business in general.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah,
You served as chief commercial officer of BioReference
I did.
Laboratories during the COVID pandemic.
I did.
How did your role evolve during that time? What were some lessons learned, through that very challenging period?
Yeah. Through through the pandemic, the evolution, I always say that those of us who were engaged in healthcare during the pandemic, it's like we did receive a PhD in whatever
Yeah.
it was that we were working on, plus crisis management,
I was
right?
about to say that was the exact verbiage I was going to share. Wow, we are like kinetic energy going on.
Exactly. And so when the pandemic started, I was responsible for a very specific part of the business at BioReference, the health plan world and the marketing world, including all of our external communications. As the pandemic evolved, I quickly then pivoted to taking on an even larger role at BioReference, which included all of our commercial business. So current clients, new lines of business that we were developing. And within that chief commercial role, I also took direct responsibility for some of our largest clients, including clients like the NBA. So the NBA was a core client that I managed every day, beginning with the bubble. So
Well, thank you for what you did. The bubble was like a great mental escape for, I would
for sure.
imagine, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people.
Sure.
And yeah, I'm sure there was a lot that went on behind the scenes to, allow the NBA and its players and its owners to feel like everyone was, safe and it wasn't, a risk not worth taking.
Definitely a high point of my career for sure.
Hmm.
The bubble actually just won an award for really combining clinical quality with
Yep.
value to the community. And it was an experience that taught me a tremendous amount working every day with really physicians, administrators, players, coaches, logistics teams. I mean, it was
Yeah.
this really crazy experience that as a healthcare leader, one would have never anticipated or foreseen, but it was a very special experience. And I think that another lesson that you learn in going through something like that is there's no avoiding mistakes, Norm, right?
Yeah.
And we all have to know that there's no avoiding mistakes, whether it be in a pandemic or outside of a pandemic. We will make mistakes, and it's how we recover from those mistakes that's really kind of the important piece. And I would say that is my biggest learning from the pandemic overall and in my role as Chief Commercial Officer.
I love that. I have to ask, what did LeBron James get you as a thank you gift for, making sure that he won his fourth championship? And he was actually interviewed on his friend Maverick Carter's show,
Uh-huh.
asking like, "Hey, what did you feel after you won that like world championship?" And
Yeah.
I think he said like, "Oh, I think this cements myself as the greatest player of all time."
Yeah.
Because he won his fourth and whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I have to imagine he got you a very generous gift, and you have like a signed thank you letter from him directly for allowing him to have the opportunity to win his fourth championship.
My non-disclosure from that time still I'm binded
Oh,
by, so I'm not going to
okay.
be able to divulge that.
Well, I hope the Bus family also offered you like a very generous thank you, because I'm sure an extra trophy in the trophy case at Lakers headquarters
Yeah.
probably was very much well appreciated by the Bus family. So walk me through at Bio Reference One, your achievements was overseeing a $150 million book of business, focusing on improving women's health. Could you
Yeah.
discuss, initiatives or projects that contributed to that success?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the Women's Health Book of Business, there were many kind of ordinary tests, right, that you would imagine that a woman goes through: pap smears, STD tests, pregnancy tests. But I would say the highlight of that, and I alluded to it earlier, was the acquisition of a product called Harmony.
Mm-hmm.
And that product was acquired from Roche Diagnostics.
Yep.
So my world came full circle in that the company that I was part of starting almost 10 years prior, sold to Roche, was now looking to divest that product and sold it back to BioReference.
Oh wow,
Hmm.
that's a very nice careers are circular.
It really was. And we acquired at BioReference the Harmony product, and our women's health team there was able to sell non-invasive prenatal technology directly to our physicians across the country. And it really is it's a technology that changes the way that women receive their pregnancy care. So something that we were super proud of, both from a personal perspective, being a woman, and a financial perspective for the company.
Yeah. Well, I have a 2-year-old baby. We're having expecting our second in May, and I see all the
Congratulations.
testing that goes on with my wife, and we've got a anatomy scan next week, and yeah, no, it's very stressful time, very exciting time,
Yeah.
and with the most or I guess least invasive testing, I know that is appreciated, by the patient, quite a bit.
For sure.
So at BioReference, you established a point of care testing program that generated, $100 million plus in revenue. Can you walk us through the process of implementing that program and just some of the great clinical outcomes you were able to generate?
Yeah, that was about really understanding what the market was needing at the time and what was the unique value that we could really bring to the market. And this concept of unique value is really kind of another thread through all of the healthcare companies that I have worked for, Norm. And so launching point of care testing. Hey, Poppy.
Luna's making her first appearance on the Digital Health Heavyweights
Hello,
podcast.
Luna. It's
I
a
like
pleasure to
to
meet
I
you.
like to tell people she's my executive assistant with like
So cute.
CUTE in all caps, and she takes her position very seriously,
I love
within
that.
the team and on the podcast. So,
Well, it's
Luna, welcome to
nice
the
to meet you, Luna.
show. You've always been behind the scenes,
Oh
and
my
I love
gosh,
you very
she's so
much.
cute. Well, thank you, Luna, for joining us. So, unique value. So, on the point of care technology side, we introduced point of care testing to the market really through the NBA and the bubble. So, the NBA realized that there was more necessary than just run of the mill COVID testing. Not that it was run of the mill at the time, but they needed that point of care ability for people who were serving the athletes that maybe were seeing some symptomology, right? And
Yeah.
so we said, okay, we can do this. So we really evaluated what was available on the market. We launched in the bubble with one technology, but really what became our differentiator to all of our other competitors is we were technology agnostic. And we were willing to say, okay, we will have 5 technologies. We will put processes in place and quality standards in place for multiple technologies so that we could satisfy the need of the customer. We were going to be flexible that way.
Hmm.
Building that business then came outside of the bubble.
Yeah.
We utilized point of care testing through many leagues, the NFL, US soccer. I could go on and on. There were many point of care labs that we set up throughout the country, really generating $100 million in only about 18 months.
Wow, that is incredible. Did it have any application outside of like sports, any other like large events?
For sure. So we had sites here in New York City. We had sites across the country that utilized our point of care testing. There were many employers, so the entertainment industry
Yep.
began to use point of care testing. There were lots of really incredible employers and groups and leagues that we worked with throughout that time that were very focused on keeping their employees
Yep.
safe.
Was anything with entertainment like theater districts or concert venues?
Yeah, we actually MSG was one of our clients.
Oh, fantastic.
So lots of really neat things that went on in Madison Square Garden that we did the testing for. So absolutely loved Madison Square Garden as one of our clients.
How many employees of the company had to stay in the bubble for that, couple month period?
Oh my gosh, there were hundreds, Norm, because
And they had
we
to
had.
stay there, like it was a confined area. Like you
That's
left, you didn't
correct.
come back. So
That's
like
correct.
once you're
That's
in, you stay for, weeks, if not months.
That's correct. There were several hundred, actually,
Wow.
between the administration staff, the swabbers. There was one person who was a phenomenal project manager who was allowed to actually move in and out of the bubble with multiple times being tested each day,
Yep.
but everybody else stayed in the bubble.
Were you in there or no?
I was remote.
You were. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, it's not the worst gig. You're like,
it
in a
wasn't the worst.
bubble with, some of the, best basketball players in the world. So,
Totally true.
for a basketball fan, that might not have been the worst place to, have to work.
Agree. Agree.
And not like there was a whole lot of other things to do during that time. Everyone else was just staying in their houses. So that would have been a good gig. I would have volunteered actually if given the
Yeah.
opportunity. But, you live and you learn. Um, At BioReference, you went on to found a consulting firm, after DHC Consulting. Walk us through just, success during that
Yeah.
and, what led from that to Talkspace.
Yeah. DHC was actually founded in 2002. So before all of this,
All
by
right.
my husband, who really is focused on many industries outside of healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And so I joined DHC Consulting the first time in 2008 and founded the healthcare
Okay.
really sector of DHC Consulting. Consulted for many years prior to coming back to industry with lots of founders, lots of startups, mostly in that genetic space, but also in the clinical trial space.
Yeah.
After BioReference, decided to go back to consulting for a period of time. And due to non-competes with the lab industry, really started to look outside of the lab industry
All
and
right.
how I could apply the things that I had learned over my 30-year career outside of the genetic and the lab and the clinical trial industry. Stayed kind of close to home and worked with a microbiome company, really interesting technology that hopefully soon will be really well embraced in the US. And then Talkspace really came on my radar because the former CEO and chairman of BioReference joined Talkspace as the CEO.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so started really getting to know Talkspace, understanding the kind of the mission-driven approach that Talkspace was tackling the market with. Worked on a project with John for the first 6 months before deciding to join. And then after getting to know the company, the management team, the people, the mission, joined Talkspace in June of this year.
Well, congratulations. It's always best to try before you buy. It's also always
Agree.
best to, maybe work with someone you've worked with before. That takes a lot of the
Agree.
guesswork out of it. So that's fantastic. We're going to dive a bunch into Talkspace, but I do have to
Yeah.
tell you a funny story about the
Yeah.
bubble. You might
Yeah.
not know, maybe you do know.
Okay.
Listeners, many of them probably won't.
Okay.
So, what's funny about the bubble is, you've got hundreds of very high net worth basketball players with all of a sudden 16 hours a day. What do you do at that time when you're not practicing, you're not playing? There was
Yeah.
one NBA player that was very entrepreneurial, very business oriented, and said, "Oh my God, like I have a business opportunity." So he bought an espresso machine and like a full, like really extravagant, extensive like coffee making machine, very similar to like a high-end coffee shop. And he started selling cups of coffee out of his hotel room. And because all these NBA players just like had these wads of cash and they really only carried around hundreds, he'd be like, "Hey, come to my, hotel room. I'll, sell you a cup of coffee." They're like, "Well, all I have is $100 bill." He's like, "Well, so do I. I don't have any change." So like, "Well, Jimmy, just keep it. Like, keep the 100." So
I
Jimmy
love it.
Butler, who has like a contract where he makes, I think, between $30 and $40 million a year, was selling $100
No way. I
cups of
didn't know this
coffee
story.
and selling like a ton of them, every day. So it's really funny. Credit to Jimmy Butler. We'll give you a shout out if you have a LinkedIn
Love
page,
Jimmy.
when
I love
we
Jimmy.
post this. But I think it's just funny that in crisis, in unique circumstances, there's always challenges, there's always opportunities, and shout out to Jimmy Butler, who
Love that.
business mind, brilliant, on the basketball court, obviously brilliant outside of the basketball court, and created a business because he saw a need and he capitalized on it. So There's a lot
Jimmy,
of opportunity in the bubble if you,
Jimmy, well, Jimmy's an incredible story, just
yeah,
in general, right? My person that I loved following in the bubble was actually Matisse Thiebaud.
yep,
I became addicted to his podcast, right? Because he was really telling a great story from his experience, and loved following Matisse during that time.
yeah, it was a really just, it's time we'll all look back on. My daughter is 2 years old. Like,
Yeah.
this is something we'll talk about, like, the COVID years, like what that was like and how it impacted like every facet, of our lives.
I
Really,
agree.
shaped what society, is what it's going to be over the next, bunch of decades. I think we're still seeing like the ripple effects, from
Agree.
COVID to this day.
Agree.
So walk through some of the core values you live by. You've been really successful in small businesses, in big businesses, in consulting, now in this, kind of digital health world. What are the core principles that you've, kind of lived by throughout that time that's
Yeah.
allowed you to achieve this success and have this type of career progression?
It's interesting. I think that Webster has said that the most popular word of the year is authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's been a word that I've lived by for as long as I can remember,
Yeah.
right? And so I would say that for me, that is actually number one, Norm. You've got to show up as who you are at work, because if you don't, it's exhausting, right? And if you
So
show
true.
up as who you are and you live that, work becomes part of the flow, and that creates success. And
Yeah.
as you evolve through life, your success continues to evolve. And you're able to pivot, to grow, to try new things, and to really be welcomed by many different people in many different places at all different times. So I think authenticity is my number one. My teams also hear me talk a lot about communication. I really believe that communicating, and I don't mean talking, I really mean listening.
Yeah.
There are many times that I am super quiet, and it's not because I'm a quiet person. It's because I'm taking it in and listening. And that goes across all industries, all business, whether it be healthcare, finance, or technology, or
Mm-hmm.
transportation, right? We need to listen. So I think between those two kind of core values, I've had a ton of success and have had a lot of happiness and joy while doing it.
I love it. And that's obvious. That comes through. And I love, your background and that you've found this space because I found this market, about 8.5 years ago when I met the Livongo folks, and it was very early. Like those were the early days of digital health. I think a lot of companies think, oh yeah, Livongo is one of the, pioneers. Well, I had to recruit for Livongo when, they were new to the business.
Yeah.
So, it's funny when we were working together in the early years, you didn't have all these options. There weren't a ton of vendors. So when we went out and tried to build, a commercial team over there, there was Castlight, there was Vitality, there was Virgin Pulse, there
Yeah.
was, the on-site clinic companies like a Premise or an Exos or, companies like that. But there weren't hundreds of them. There were maybe a couple dozen. So I was
Hmm.
constantly trying to get creative, with them of, hey, what markets are similar and congruent and, would have transferable skill sets. And, over time, the business got more broad, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of digital health companies over time. And today, there are definitely thousands. But yeah, no, in the early years, like we had to get really creative and really scrappy and really gritty, to find people who had the skill sets, that just hadn't done that exact thing. And, the more people like you that come in and have a lot of success, it just allows us to be even more creative, in the work me and my team do. So great to see. I'll be rooting for your success. I'll help you in any way I
Thank you.
can. And
I
you probably
appreciate
don't
that.
need the help. You're doing really well from everything I hear. So that's, really, really good. You've shown, a ton of passion about leading and mentoring world-class teams. What are some tips for leaders trying to manage, top producers and very senior level people?
Yeah. Um, so number one, I would say set expectations and communicate them, right?
Yep.
But then give people room to maneuver on their own, be themselves,
Yep.
fulfill those expectations as exactly who they are. I would say the second is to make difficult decisions and execute on the difficult decisions. Don't let people kind of linger or languish, right? Really know when you have to make difficult decisions and then move. I think that the next one is to build teams with people who have complementary skills and perspectives and don't always look to model your team off of who you are, right?
Yeah.
You want those compliments. You want that healthy mutual respect among your team and that debate. But healthy is the key. You need to make sure that you're building a team that can find that happiness and that joy and that grit and doing what needs to be done every day while challenging each other.
Yeah, that's great advice. As chief business officer of Talkspace, can you share insights into how the platform is changing the landscape of mental health?
Yeah.
Because there are
I think
thousands of companies, literally thousands, that do mental health. Like, would
I
love your
know.
perspective on what Talkspace is doing that's different, that's
Yeah.
differentiated, like what the market should know about,
Yeah.
all that your team is doing.
I think that the first piece is when you're bringing therapy to somebody when they need it and how they want it,
Hmm.
I mean, that just changes the game for people. So having the availability of whether it be talk or text or audio and giving people that optionality creates an openness and a platform for people who have never thought that they could comfortably engage in mental health, an opportunity to balance themselves, to think about mental fitness, and to start building their own mental health building blocks. I think that that's number one. I think about a story of one of my neighbors, and their oldest daughter was struggling with mental health issues while she was like 15, 16. And she literally used to jump out of the car on her way to go see the therapist.
Oh my.
And I think of her so many times because I just imagine if she had Talkspace at that time and she was able to just talk to a therapist or look at a therapist instead of having to get in that car with her parents, how much more quickly she would have found her footing or her balance so that she could then continue with all the successes she's now having in life. But it was a hard period of time, right? I also think the ability for asynchronous messaging, that ability to be able to text your therapist 24/7 and get what's on your mind and what you're going through
Hmm.
out in writing. It's like journaling with somebody who's an expert that's going to answer you,
Yep.
right? And I would say that the last thing that I see as super special is Talkspace has a crisis alert system that's powered by AI
Yep.
on all of our text messages that are going through. So if somebody is experiencing crisis, a therapist is alerted, and able to intervene with that person immediately.
Hmm.
And that's a place to be able to go where, as our suicide rate is increasing in this country, to have that type of intervention via AI is really special, and it's going to really change the game as we move forward. And one other cool fact, 50% of the people that actually engage with Talkspace have never engaged with therapy before.
Wow, that's significant.
Isn't that cool?
That's really awesome. Love
Yeah.
that. So you're leading the direct to enterprise business.
Yep.
There's also a direct to consumer component of Talkspace,
Yep.
correct? How do the
Yep.
two differ, and like what are you doing on the direct to enterprise side that's really like moving the business forward?
Yeah. So from a product perspective, Norm, they're not that different.
Yeah.
So on the consumer side, if I'm a consumer, I can purchase the Talkspace self-guided application. I can engage in therapy either with live sessions or asynchronous,
Yep.
and I can purchase psychiatry. Our offering on the enterprise side is the same, but by an employer engaging with Talkspace, it's removing all of those barriers, really those financial barriers for an individual to engage with therapy.
Yep.
On the employer side, we have all three products available. You can engage in a self-guided product, you can have therapy via live session or async messaging or psychiatry if med management is needed. But the employer has the benefit of receiving monthly reports, not on the specifics of the engagement of the individual, but on how their enterprise is engaging, how we're seeing engagement impact retention, how we're seeing absenteeism being impacted by engagement in mental health services.
That's incredible. So,
Yeah.
You've shared half patients that use Talkspace have never used, mental
Yeah.
health counseling before.
Yeah.
You're talking about incredible impact. Can you tell us some patient stories that you're like most proud of?
Yeah, I actually, so I've only been here 6 months,
Yeah.
but there are two different stories that I'll tell you. So there was this guy named Charles that I met in California at a meeting. And Charles was actually just featured in our Men of Action podcast
Okay.
that we held last week. It was actually a webinar. And I would highly recommend, Norm, go check it out. It was so cool.
All right.
But Charles is a veteran. And 10 years ago, after he left the Army, he came back to society and was experiencing some difficult re-entering society. And 10 years ago, when we first started, he started using Talkspace. I was lucky enough a couple of months ago during my first several weeks here at Talkspace to meet Charles.
Yeah.
He told me his story, and I said, "You have to meet our team because your story needs to be profiled." He has stayed with us for like 10 years. He now helps to educate other veterans who are returning about Talkspace services. And he works in our employer world where he has responsibility to help people within his company learn about different types of services that are available. So I love the Charles story. The other one is not somebody that I've met personally, but recently we've launched a huge initiative with New York City where we're covering nearly 500,000 13 to 17-year-olds in New York City. And while doing that, our marketing team, they requested testimonials from our current teenage users, and there's this awesome video with 4 or 5 of our teenage users talking about how Talkspace has impacted their lives. It's on our website. You can totally check it out. But it touches me literally every time I've seen it, and I've probably seen it 50 times.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really, really nice.
Yeah.
You've had an extensive career, very successful. I always, correlate someone's success with like, hey, do people who've worked with this person in the past want to keep working with them? I think your story that like your previous CEO brought you with them to the next gig is just like the ultimate endorsement of someone's, success and abilities and, culture fit and all these things.
Yeah.
Someone earlier in their career that's watching this or listening to this, like what advice would you give if their goal is to be really successful?
So I think that the first one, and I'm going to just keep coming back to this, right? Never stop learning. And we learn from others by listening. We learn from reading. We learn from listening to podcasts like yours, right? Pay attention to the things that are going on around you. Don't get too self-involved to think that you have all of the answers, right? So many times when we're young, we're factual learners, and we don't pay enough attention to those who have gone through like many years of their career, that they have this crystallized learning now and this crystallized intelligence. And I say pay attention to that. Listen, learn, read, pay attention to others. That would be my number one. The second would be this this concept of speed to recovery, right? Or your speed to your next step. Like don't be low too long on mistakes, and don't be high for too long on wins. Like try to stay balanced so that your speed to your next thing is quick. And you can then focus on that next. I'm not saying don't celebrate. Definitely celebrate. But make sure you're focusing on that continued evolution.
It's getting back on the horse, like, and
Correct.
It's not just when you fall off. It's when
right.
you've, you're on the horse and you're, celebrating. It's like, hey, like maybe you should go back to practice the next day. And
That's
not
exactly
just, celebrate your success and have that like hangover, so to speak. So I think that's really good. I guess, for someone who's, looking to, be someone that people want to work with again and again and again, like, what do you think you've done, to be that person for, folks you've worked with in the past? And what would your advice be to, become that person if someone's earlier in their career and they want to be that?
I think that you need to look at whether it be companies or teams as a team. Yeah. It's not about the leader. It is really about how the team interacts. And so building that team that has complementary parts. And as I said before, that mutual respect. And mutual respect doesn't mean to just go along with what somebody says. It means having the confidence to challenge that person. And I would say you need to surround yourself with people who are going to challenge you. You need to surround yourself with people who have mutual respect. You need to surround yourself with people who can find joy in what they're doing, right? And surround yourself with people who have a like-minded mission to how you want to proceed. And I do think in healthcare, our mission has to be more than profitability, Norm. We have to have a common mission, and remember that when we choose to enter healthcare, it doesn't matter if it's a service, a product, digital, or genetics. We're serving people's lives, and it has to be more than just profitability. There has to be a higher mission there.
It's great advice. So I ask everyone who comes on this podcast, we're in healthcare. We live it, we breathe it, we sleep it. It's what gets us out of bed in the morning.
For sure.
But that's just business. Like on a personal level, how do you participate in healthcare? How do you practice what you preach when it comes to exercise and reducing stress? Like how do you maintain balance in a very stressful job? Because, being a commercial leader of a, business that's been valued at over $1 billion is not a low stress job.
It's not. I would say that my family is at the core of reducing stress. Sometimes they cause stress, but my family is at the core of my stress reduction. So my husband, my 2 sons, my dog, my family, my extended family, my friends, I reduce my stress by spending time with my family, whether it be going to an NBA game or going to a college football game or going out to dinner or just staying at home and playing Catan. That's like my number one stress relief. But when I'm alone, yoga is my thing. So I love yin yoga to reduce.
My wife's a yoga teacher as like her part-time job. She's a speech language pathologist in an autism clinic as her full-time job, but she does yoga a bunch and then teaches a couple classes a week. And
love it. Great. So I do yin probably twice a week. And then for exercise, I actually do hot power vinyasa. So yoga
can't do that. That's where I tap out. I do yin.
It's hard.
I don't do yang. That's
it's
not
hard.
my thing.
It's hard.
I love it. That's great. That's really, really good. I can tell you this, and this has not been shared on the podcast yet. the best stress reducer I have in my week, and literally the highlight of my week, is Monday evenings. So after like a stressful Monday day, you come back, your inbox is full, you got all the things. My daughter is her swim class. So I get in my bathing suit, I don't want to. It's cold in Cleveland. I dread it going into it. Then I see her and I see her smile and we're in there. And, for 30 minutes on a Monday evening, she's having the most fun you could possibly imagine. And I just get to see that joy, and I get to do that with her and share that bond. And whatever stress I have vanishes. And we always have a great night. We'll have dinner after, and we'll just kind of get her to bed. And me and my wife will turn on the TV after we get Mila to bed. And it's just the best start to the week. And even on the days I don't feel like I want to do it, the second I get into that pool and I see her smile and I see her laugh, it all melts away. So I think it's really important to kind of have those rituals weekly that, you can kind of look forward to and can kind of ground you, when, the bullets are flying in the business world, and, there's a lot of competing priorities, for your time and attention. So that's great. Healthy recipes. I ask everyone, hey, how do we practice what we preach? I think a lot of healthy eating comes down to how easy is it? Is it a big disruption in your life? We're all busy, but we also, want to take care of ourselves. Any quick healthy recipes that are your go-tos that might be someone else's inspiration to be oh yeah, I could try that. I could make that for my family this
I
week.
have a good one. I have a really good one. It's a butternut squash sweet potato soup.
Okay.
And it's so easy. You buy cubed butternut squash. You cut 2 sweet potatoes, Vidalia onions.
Skin on or off on the sweet
potato? Off. Definitely
okay.
off.
Peel them first.
You saute them in just a little bit of oil.
Yep.
You put 8 cups of vegetable broth. You end up boiling it for maybe 45 minutes. Put some salt, pepper, and tarragon. Puree it, and you've got a delicious, delicious healthy soup.
All right. I love it. I do purees in my Vitamix, but I know some people have the handheld, I forget what they're called, but it's
immersion blender.
Immersion blender, correct.
Yeah.
No, that sounds great. I make something similar. Well, first and foremost, Natalie, thank you so much for joining us on the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast. I always appreciate it when we meet someone new and you step into the ring with me. This is a great episode. I really think the listeners are going to enjoy it. And again, Natalie Cummins from Talkspace, thank you for joining us, and enjoy your day.
Thank you.